Ho, 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 and all that jazz.
All that jazz, as long as it's not Michael Bublé.
I'm fine with that,
yeah.
Says Mr.
Harry
Green
Connick Jr.
Reeves.
is the true crooner of our time.
Because of his excellent portrayal of a military man in Independence Day, the film.
Died in bravery, yes.
Did he die?
But he was also a fighter pilot in Memphis Belle, or he was on the, I think he was the gunner or something.
But he died in Independence Day?
Yeah.
Took Will Smith a couple more decades to die after
that.
that.
Between films, right? Because they couldn't afford him for the second one. Anyway, Merry Christmas, everybody. How are y'all doing? We're glad to be back. Welcome to Trinity Radio. I'm Jonathan Pritchett. Along with me is
Braxton Hunter, back from Australia, which I'll tell you about at the end. There has been a major shift in my worldview that some of you are already aware of that we'll talk about toward the end of the show. Jonathan?
Yes, but before we get into today's topic, which is responding to claims that, the Bible contradicts itself all throughout the whole Bible. It's just a big contradictory mess and all this. I did want to say that it's Christmas, and I love Christmas, and Braxton and I have swapped Christmas playlists. Mine is filled with Christmas classics, and his is filled with alternative rock music.
Christmas alternative rock. And not entirely. Dolly made the cut.
Dolly and Kenny Rogers both made the cut.
Yeah,
along with the 21 Pilots and the
There's
Killers.
No 21 Is there 21 Pilots?
Yes.
Dadgummit. My daughter was into 21 Pilots at the time.
Yes,
okay?
you put that in there. But there was Smashing Pumpkins and other stuff. Mine has, when I was growing up, I remember, you should remember this. You were a Southern Baptist in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
You may remember that Christians would always throw a fit about Xmas, and they would say Jesus, not Santa, and all of these things.
Right.
Well, in the late 1940s, Gene Autry did not have this problem, right? When he wrote and recorded "Here Comes Santa Claus," right? What does he say? He says, "Hang your stockings and say your prayers," right? Yeah. He says, "Peace will come to all," right? If we just follow the light. So give thanks to the Lord above.
Praise the Lord.
Because Santa Claus is coming tonight. It's not Jesus or Santa.
Santa Claus is just a pawn in Jesus's game in that song.
That's right.
And then there's one that talks about Friar Brown or something like that. We're going to get married. We'll go see. There's another term for clergy there. I don't know. Yeah, Christian stuff is at the heart of the best Santa stuff.
Yes.
Right? But anyway.
So it's not Jesus or Santa. and one is the risen Savior, and the other is a mythological person that was based very loosely on any number of different things, going all the way back to.
Well, we just shared a video from Inspiring Philosophy that will take you through all that.
Yeah, and so, but I'm so glad that when people got caught up in the 90s and early 2000s about the war on Christmas, I'm thankful that Christians have finally matured back to where Gene Autry was in 1947.
Yeah, and just while we're talking
news.
about Santa Claus, we just want to point out to you who are lack-theist atheists, who have simply a lack of belief in God and are not actively believing that there is no God. You're not allowed to say seriously that Jesus is like, or that God is like Santa, because you actively believe that Santa does not exist. You don't merely lack a belief. So that's disingenuous to say he's like Santa unless you're willing to pony up and argue that God, so defined, does not exist.
Right.
All right, let's get into this now that we've done a very apologetics Christmas. So
I love Christmas.
We have today, Jonathan, a couple of videos. One from Tiffany Vogue. Someone asked a moment ago, what is a Tiffany Vogue?
That's a good way to.
You're about to find out. And let's just go ahead and jump into that, and then we will from there sort of flounder about giving an answer.
Hello! Today's Bible story is a choose-your-own adventure. We don't use the word contradictions because biblical literalists don't like to admit that there are any contradictions in their holy, infallible word. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Exodus 20, verse 8.
Sorry, I just need a breather. This is a bit much. You know, this person reminds me of like, when you haven't seen someone from your teenage years in a long time and they've turned out completely different, except as an embodiment of the American South, that's how I feel about this person. It's like I haven't seen the South in a long time, and now that I'm seeing it again, something has changed. It's not the same as it once was. Okay, let's get back into it.
Now remember the Sabbath. Wouldn't that sort of insinuate that this is something that's going to continue on? Something that you shouldn't forget about? Well, one man esteemeth one day above another, another esteemeth every day alike. But every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. Romans 14, verse 5. Will you be remembering the Sabbath and keeping it holy? Or will you not to? Choose your own adventure. Isn't it so funny how an all-knowing deity who exists outside of space and time sometimes changes his mind around about things? And they used to take the Sabbath real seriously, even going so far as to unalive a person by stoning just for simply picking up a stick. Seems like something that you wouldn't just turn around and change your mind about. Was this important or not? It's time for you to choose your own adventure.
Okay, change of mind or change of covenant? Yes. Mr. Green reads... before we respond to that kind of nonsense, I don't know if you can see this, but you will see.
Hold it back just a little bit.
Oh, shoot.
You started it playing.
Yeah, oops.
We don't have the rights to play that.
You will see Islands in the Stream in one of my playlists. So it is a great song, but that's not those aren't the Christmas, that's not a Christmas song, but there is a Dolly Parton Christmas song and a Kenny Rogers. But I do have Islands in the Stream in one of my playlists. My playlists are epic, and of course that song would be there. I love that song. Anyway,
yeah. So what we've heard is not even a contradiction, not even alleged contradiction.
No.
All we've heard from this person is that, look, it used under the old covenant, under the law of Moses, it was punishable by death, at least in some cases. It seems like if it was
a maximal punishment.
Yeah, the maximal punishment would be death if someone did not observe the Sabbath. On the other hand, in the New Testament, under a different covenant, it's not a requirement. What's the contradiction here? I'm not understanding the contradiction.
Yeah. Let's lay down some ground rules, Braxton.
Yeah, so the ground rules for a contradiction, and this is going to be important going forward. And by the way, that's all we have from Tiffany Vogue. So for Brando, who says, I don't think I can get through this one, we're moving on from Tiffany after this. But it should be noted that when we're talking about Bible contradictions, there's a couple of ground rules that I think our skeptics need to take notice of as they approach this sort of an idea. Is that number one, we're going to work with the contradictions that you give us. So does the Bible ever correct itself, or is it choose your own adventure where it seems like it's saying something else than what it? Well, I'm only going to work with what you gave me. Maybe it does, but I'm going to work with what you gave me. Number two, you need to understand that when you're alleging a contradiction in the Bible, you're the one who bears the burden of proof. Skeptics love to talk about the burden of proof. Well, you're making a claim. The burden of proof lies with the person making a claim, and you're making a claim that these two passages in some way are contradictory and can't both be true. And so if that's the case, then you're going to have to pony up and give us the reasons why that's so. That means that all we have to do on this side of this is to offer a defeater. And a defeater is just any explanation here that would account for this without there being a contradiction. We don't have to know whether it's true. Guess what? We don't even have to believe that it's true. But if you're making the claim that the only explanation is that there's a contradiction here, and we can provide any explanation that makes it not a contradiction, then your claim that it must be a contradiction fails. So this may not be as easy as you think it is. Now it may be that somewhere, again, in the Bible, there is some sort of a contradiction, or there is somewhere where the Bible corrects itself.
Unresolvable contradiction.
Unresolvable. But we're working with what you've brought. And what you've brought here is not contradictory. Now, someone might say, well, you should be able to argue the truth from anywhere in the Bible. Well, here's the thing that you need to understand, and I say this a lot on this show. When you pick any random thing from the Bible, it's not that we think that all of everything in the Bible necessarily should be or can be used as an apologetic for the truth of Christianity writ large. We have reasons why we believe that God exists, God raised Jesus from the dead, and Scripture is authoritative. But when you pick up some random place and you try to say there's a contradiction there, we're not using that to argue for the truth of Christianity. So if you're going to allege there's a contradiction there, then you need to give us why that contradiction, that claim of a contradiction, is the only possible explanation. So long as we can give you anything that resolves the contradiction, whether we know it to be true or even think it's true, then your claim it has to be a contradiction is out the window.
Yes. But moreover, like we said, there's been a change. Understanding the context of the literature that you're reading is helpful. And so when we understand that we're in a new covenant, that the Bible itself says is a better covenant, we understand that Jesus has fulfilled the old covenant and that there's a new, better one, right? Now, if you want to honor the Sabbath, go for it. And I'm talking like sundown Friday to sundown. If that's your thing, go for it. But when they were figuring out that God has now included the Gentiles into this Jesus movement, that God is a global God that wants to be inclusive of both Jews and Gentiles, he's not just the God of the Jews only, the apostles sat around in Jerusalem in Acts chapter 15 tried to figure this stuff out. And you know what they didn't mention? That when they said the Gentiles should probably abstain from meat that's got blood in it, never mentioned the Sabbath.
That's right.
It wasn't a major point of contention. Now, there are principles about the Sabbath that we can learn from that benefit us as Christians. A day of rest is a good thing. Completely changed the work week of the world, by the way. It is good to take a day of rest. It's not necessarily a day of worship. Every day is a day of worship. So I view the Sabbath. Now, I know that they're the Seventh-day Adventists and others want to nitpick about this because they want to reinterpret those verses and say, well, that's not really talking about the ticket. Okay, whatever. My Christian liberty allows for you to think that and be wrong about it. I don't. But as far as this choose your own adventure, that is a feature, not a bug, of the Christ event, right? For some people, can't eat meat, have to just eat vegetables. For people like me, I eat meat. Braxton, do you eat meat?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah. So there is some about this choosing your own adventure in Christianity that I think is a feature because we follow the spirit, not the letter of the law. So,
yeah. So I think that pretty well wraps that up and also sets us up to talk about further contradictions because we have another video I want to take a look at that claims that the Bible corrects itself. So here we go. By the way, I should say before we jump over to this that this is not the video that I mentioned on Twitter where I said, hey, I want to gather up some Bible contradiction claims because I'm going to have a special guest on. I'll tell you who that special guest is going to be. I was recently in Australia with Steve Gregg. Now, I'm going to talk more about Australia later at the end. But one of the things that I asked Steve was, number one, would you be willing to debate a very interesting and extremely popular person on the subject of Catholicism? And he agreed. I just have to make sure that all comes together. I hadn't even told you about that. And then the second thing is come on and do a video where you just respond to every imaginable Bible contradiction that atheists want to throw at you, both that we collected before and that people throw at you live. And he acted like that was as simple to him as making his morning coffee. So I'm looking forward to that. But for now, we're going to go on to some just to whet your appetite for that later video. Here we go.
So the Bible is full of contradictions, and a lot of people just really don't like that. But what's interesting to me is not that it has contradictions, I realized that a long time ago, but what those contradictions are doing. Many of those contradictions are written on purpose to stand in tension with and even correct prior writings in the Bible. So think about like Joshua 6, where God tells Joshua to go and destroy the entire city of Jericho, man, woman, children, everything. And how that kind of narrative is woven throughout the Old Testament. Go and destroy all of your enemies. But then in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says that we're supposed to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. And then he says, in that way, you can be real sons of your Father in heaven. He's saying God really is the kind of God that loves his enemies. You see how the Bible corrects the Bible when the Bible has better or more information?
Well, that doesn't seem either contradictory or a correction.
That's right.
Okay. One is national warfare, and the other is personal, local, individual, how you are to act towards your personal enemies. It's not a national enemy. It's, I should love my personal enemies.
That's right. The popular one that's similar to this is, well, the eye for an eye statement because of the you've heard it said thing. But the eye for an eye, I can't think of a more perfect standard of justice than eye for eye, tooth for tooth, right? It's a perfect equality of justice there. At least that's what it's aiming at, and it seems to achieve that. But then when Jesus says, I tell you to turn the other cheek, well, think about the difference that Dr. Pritchett just pointed out between these two things. On the one hand, what you have there is you have something that the courts are supposed to do, or we should say the government, so to speak, was supposed to do. And then on the other hand, what Jesus wants you to do interpersonally as one of his followers. Jesus didn't say that the courts shouldn't dispense precisely that kind of justice as eye for eye or tooth for tooth. And he didn't say in this case that that Yahweh was wrong to make such commands about Canaan, for which he had given 400 plus years of mercy that never gets mentioned prior to that, mentioned very early, even in Genesis. So there's just no contradiction here. It's a different category.
Right. It's complete. And of course, as we've discussed in the past about the turn the other cheek, it's really talking about if you're slapped, which is not about physical violence towards you. It's about shame.
Shame. You were
embarrassed in public, and don't be running to the courts over minor embarrassments like that.
Right.
Right. And then demanding this, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Well, you want a backhand for a backhand because, or really, it's actually palm. Is what it's talking about there, like a slap. It's more about shame anyway. So yeah, this is just a big categorical error.
Well, that's actually an important point I'd like to draw out there. Is you made a good point there that even though we think about someone slapping someone, say Will Smith, for example, slapping, who did he slap?
Chris Rock.
Chris Rock. He slapped Chris Rock, and obviously in our world, we not only see the shame, we do see the shame, like, oh, the two dudes, one slaps the other. What's going on here? There's a wife involved and all that. Or maybe there's a wife involved. But whatever's going on with that situation, right. There's a lot of honor shame happening there. But we also focus on the fact that he struck him, which is a big no-no in our society. I'm glad that it is.
Yeah.
But it was about violence as well. Where here we're talking about a first century, more gritty world. It's not so much about the violence as it is the disrespect.
But notice who heaped the most shame out of that event. It wasn't Chris Rock.
Right. That's right.
So yeah, I mean, there's a wisdom there, but this is a
Siri doesn't understand.
Siri does, of course not. It's a machine.
But this is why I said at the beginning about Harry Connick Jr. He died in the movie, but Will Smith, who was also in the movie, took him about 20 more years to die.
Right.
His career died.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, he did win an Oscar that night, though. But
It was already in the plans.
Yeah.
It was already on the conveyor belt.
But yeah, I just don't understand. There are tougher.
Howdy, Slam RN.
There are tougher. I mean, Christians have written large books on,
sorry,
on dealing with these difficult passages and resolving different tensions and supposed contradictions and all. Like I said, we're dealing with what we're given, what we come across, right?
If you don't think these are the best contradictions, pal, it's on you.
Yeah, but it's the you thought it was worth making a video over, but it's really it's like reading is a lost art, right? Mm-hmm. It's functional illiteracy, even though you can technically read words, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's putting no thought into what it is that I'm reading and how to put things in their proper categories.
Yeah, and this is a great example of someone who, it's clear, doesn't want it to be true. Doesn't necessarily want the Bible to be right or a way out for the Bible of this alleged contradiction that isn't at all a contradiction. But it's like it's like closing your ears. It strikes me as closing your ears off to possible resolutions for this. It's like I remember Blake Genta. He's another apologist.
Well, to be fair to this person did not care that it contradicts. What he found,
he's trying to make a point that it corrects itself.
That it corrects itself.
Which actually lays another level, puts another layer onto the begging of the question, because what he's saying here is not only is there a contradiction, but that he happens to know somehow that the point of that was to undo what had been done prior.
Yeah, a lot of people with the Sermon on the Mount get this wrong, understanding the difference between like national and personal, right? Mm-hmm. Because and a lot of people misunderstand the difference in the types of introductory formulas is what they're called. Mm-hmm. So when you want to introduce an idea, if it comes from Scripture, you know what the introductory formula is? As it was written, or as it is written. Mm-hmm. You know what the introductory formula is if it's not verbatim as it was written? You've heard it said.
Right.
Right? So you're appealing to a tradition that likely grew up around something grounded in a text somewhere, but it's not precise with the text. He's talking about a tradition that probably developed around a particular text, but he's appealing to the tradition around it more so than any sort of. That's why it's not technically quoted verbatim. It's more alluded to. Mm-hmm. But he'll say, "You have heard it said." Well, what have you heard it said about the tradition that grew up around a text versus
right.
When Jesus wants to make a statement about a text as it is written? Right. So there's a difference. You have to pay attention
as
to
it is written versus you've heard it said.
Right. So you have to pay attention to the introductory formulas and what Jesus is doing in response.
That was worth you showing up today just to get that, audience. Now, here's something I want to say about Blake Genta, a Christian apologist who's a friend of mine, and I encourage you to check out his stuff. And Blake pointed this out one time, okay, so you have Christians, Jonathan, who are functioning on methodological naturalism because they're scientists. So say you've got this Christian who is a physicist or who's a biologist or whatever, and they're setting aside their beliefs about the supernatural or metaphysics of that sense in order to try and look for, even if they believe that the best explanation is something miraculous or God, they're still, their job, what they've signed up for, is to try and give the best naturalistic explanation for a particular event or thing in science. So even though they have these other Christian beliefs, set those aside and try to figure out the best naturalistic explanation, even if you think something is miraculous in an event that might happen. Okay.
Well, it's methodological naturalism until you can't use that.
Well, that's right. But what I'm saying is even a skeptic could do that in the reverse. And Blake Genta, I heard point this out. You could come to the biblical text and you can say, I don't believe this is inerrant. I think it's a jumbled mess. But you can still go through the practice of, but just because I know I'm going to make a video on TikTok for a bunch of Christians in which these two guys from some seminary are going to respond to me one day, or just because I want to do the best research I can, I'm going to see if I can find a way that this is not contradictory. And I'm going to do methodological Christianity or methodological biblical inerrancy to try and see if I can figure out a way that this isn't contradictory before I go out and say that it's contradictory.
Yeah, the claim is contradiction. The claim is not weird, messed up, kind of overturning previous stuff. That's not the claim. The claim is, and you think this goes back to like logical problems of evil and other things. You're talking about a logical problem. Something is A and not A at the same time in the same sense. So you said that's the standard you've got to meet if you're going to use the word contradiction, right? And so the problem with that is, I mean, when you make that set that standard for a text, you have to meet it.
You have to meet it.
And if you don't meet it,
you fail.
Yeah, you can still say, well, okay, maybe you have some sort of technicality. You can get that away from being a contradiction. Well, then it's not a contradiction.
Right, it's not you need to make a softer claim.
Yeah, now you just don't like it, but that's irrelevant.
Or you think that there was a contradiction. You think that the ideas were contradictory, but technically the way they were worded avoids a contradiction or something.
Yeah, I mean, you could be a skeptic or a non-Christian or even, I guess, a progressive or whatever, but you could come to the text with the benefit of the doubt to the text and to the author and say, okay, what are we dealing with here?
Yeah.
You know, and that's the same thing that people will say, well, you know, Christian apologists, you should do that with like other religious texts. I agree. I'm not disputing that.
Yeah.
You know, but
Utopia Buster says it never ceases to amaze me how deniers make statements based on their demonstrable ignorance. And Jonathan Paisley says proper hermeneutics would clear up much of these contradictions. Now, you might think that's Christian chest thumping, but it's demonstrably true in a case where we're trying to take something from the Old Testament.
Yeah, we're not talking about biblical hermeneutics. We're just talking about reading, standard reading and interpreting things in their context, right? Yeah. That's not something that pertains to the Bible. You should use good hermeneutics with everything you read.
Well, let's jump back in.
Okay.
About how in Exodus 34, God says to Moses that he by no means clears the guilty and that he visits the sins of the fathers onto the third and fourth generation. So the children pay for their father's sins. But then in Ezekiel, I think it's in chapter 18, Ezekiel says that God told him to say that God does not punish the kids for the father's sins, that the righteousness of the righteous is their own and the wickedness of the wicked is their own. Now, Ezekiel wrote that 600 to 800 years after the Exodus, depending on when you date the Exodus, and it represents a correction. It is a correction. The Bible corrects itself when the Bible has more information or better information.
Okay. So, is the Bible engaging in contradiction when we're told that the sins of the father will be visited on the sons to the third and fourth generation, and then later says that God does not hold a son guilty for his father's sins or vice versa? One thing we need to understand is the difference here between the consequences, God allowing the consequences of someone else's mistakes to play out to later generations, versus God bringing specific judgment on a particular, holding someone guilty for someone else's sins. It is true that, say with the captivity, for example, the decisions made by the parents are going to play out to later generations. That's just going to happen. If a mother drinks a lot while she's pregnant and her child has fetal alcohol syndrome, the son, let's say, is experiencing the consequences of what the parent did. Now, it does say visiting, speaking about God's activity in this, but we see throughout the Old Testament, we see examples where God does something or visits something in this way by allowing the natural ramifications to play out. For example, in the book of Job, when Satan, if it's Satan, comes to Jesus or comes to God and says, basically that if you'll let me do what I want to do to Job, he's not going to worship you anymore like he did. And so we're told that God does this thing to Job, but how does God do it? By allowing the enemy to do what the enemy already wants to do. And so visiting the sins to the third and fourth generation makes a lot of sense if you say, well, God's just allowing their consequences. The consequences of doing what he told them not to do play out. And then in another case, we're told, but he doesn't hold individuals guilty for the sins of some other.
Right. In Ezekiel, it's don't say that proverb anymore. You know, our fathers ate sour grapes and the children's teeth were set on edge. He's like, don't say that because everyone belongs to me, and the soul who sins is the one that dies. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. You're not being punished for this. That's different than having the iniquities visited upon you. Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, either individually or collectively, the nation still, like the United States, you know, for things that have long passed our generation, mm-hmm. we still have the consequences of it lingering in our culture that we're still trying
absolutely.
To do. So I mean, it's like there's a difference between that and then me dying for you, like my dad's sin, right?
Mm-hmm. Right, or more, God holding you personally culpable and you dying because he holds you personally culpable.
Guilty for my dad's sin. Right. That's what's going on in Ezekiel 18. So
and I think this would have more force. There is a problem here, I think, or something that needs to be discussed by people that think that Adam, even though he didn't use this example, Adam, we are personally culpable for Adam's sin.
Well, if you believe in imputed guilt of Adam.
But you and I don't think that.
Right.
We think that we're culpable for our own sin, and we all do plenty of our own sinning.
Yeah.
What we got from Adam, as the Southern Baptist Faith and Message 2000 says, is that we inherited a nature and an environment that is inclined towards sin.
Yeah. I call it the death nature. We inherit a death nature, not and death passes all. Even those, Paul goes out his way to say, those who sin, that it's not like Adam sinned, right? I mean, in Romans 5:13. So it's just like, Paul even goes out of his way to say people who didn't necessarily sin the way Adam did. So, yeah.
All right, let's see here what we're going to do next.
Well, we're going to let him keep talking?
Let's let him keep talking.
Consider this one, where in Samuel, it says that David is the 8th son, and then in Chronicles, which was written a couple hundred years later, it says that David was the 7th son. And we know the chronicler has access to 1 Samuel. We know he knows it because he quotes it in 1 Chronicles and 2 Chronicles. And he chooses to correct the information from 1 Samuel. Or consider this one from the...
That's a claim that I agree that he had access to that information, but he's making a claim that he chose to correct it. That is not something that he's supported. He's just asserting
he did choose to put a different number. The question is, why did he choose to put a different number if he chose to put a different number and it's not a copyist error?
Well, he says, well, number one, it could be a
copyist error.
But I don't like that explanation at all. But the thing is Samuel talks about how Jesse has 8 sons.
Mm-hmm.
The chronicler is not writing that Jesse only has 7 sons. The chronicler lists them 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and stops at 7 with David.
Right.
And so I agree with him that he has access. What I don't agree with is the idea that he's correcting the record from 1 Samuel.
For example, one explanation for why he says 7, it could be because one of the sons died.
Right. And didn't have offspring.
Or didn't have offspring.
Right.
So there's no legacy here to discuss.
Right.
And both of those would make perfect sense of it.
Right.
Now, you might say, well, I don't find that entirely plausible. Well, I do, of course.
Yeah, genealogies are incomplete.
Me and Jonathan live in these texts. Yeah, it does. But even if one just said, well, I just think y'all are trying to get out of it. Well, maybe you're right. But remember, you're the one making the claim there's a contradiction here. So you're the one who
or
has
the
to
claim that the Bible's correcting earlier information.
Or that's the further layering on I talked about.
And a little bit of thought would number one, genealogies are notoriously incomplete in the ancient world for reasons that the authors had in their own context. Mm-hmm. Not a contradiction, not a correction. They had their own reasons for listing specific people in specific contexts, right? I mean, if you want to know, like he admits, okay, for Samuel, I'm glad he understands that it was written at an earlier date. That's more of a traditionalist position, mm-hmm. right? And so they would have more reliable information as to how many kids Jesse had, mm-hmm. right? They had a reason for putting but again, come to the text with the benefit of the doubt and a little bit of knowledge about the ancient Mediterranean world, how genealogies work, and other possibilities of why one of the children may not have been mentioned. Mm-hmm. And you come to your assumption shouldn't be first, it's a correction in this guy's thing, or second, it's a contradiction. Maybe it's, the authors, the chroniclers probably had reasons for why.
Right. Assume a minimal level of intelligence. Now, I know that you guys always talk about how this was all written by goat herders, but try herding goats. Sounds like these goat herders probably know a little more than you about some things anyway. But imagine that this person who could put together this document had a minimal level of intelligence and sees the reference he's using, or one of the references he's using, and understands that he's not putting exactly the same number down. Of course he understands he's not putting the same number down. So the first thing that comes to your mind should not be that it's a contradiction, but why did he put a different number down? Unless you just want to assume that all these biblical authors were complete idiots, and yet they could produce these sorts of materials. I don't think so. But the bottom line is there's very simple. Remember, you're claiming a contradiction, then you got to demonstrate that. And as long as we can come up with any explanation that makes it not a contradiction, then your claim that it must be a contradiction fails. And we've given you at least 2. Maybe the chronicler knows that one of them died or one of them didn't have any kids.
Amos was a shepherd and goat herder and a sycamore tree guy. And he only wrote things that Martin Luther King quoted in famous speeches, right. But what does goat herders
have against goat herders?
Yeah,
what's wrong with being a goat
herder? Man. Book of Amos.
And I bet you would find it really difficult to be a goat herder.
Not a prophet or son of a prophet, meaning he wasn't in a particular prophetic school. Amos is awesome. I like books written by goat herders like Amos.
Goat herders turn out to be great writers.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back.
Of Kings, where a guy kills all of Ahab's family, and God says, "Hey, good job, you killed all of Ahab's family." But then in Hosea, Hosea says that God told him to say that this guy is going to be punished because of the wickedness that he did towards the family of Ahab. What's fascinating to me is, again, not that there are these contradictions, but that the Bible seems to correct itself when the Bible has more or better information. So the Bible is full of contradictions.
So first of all, before we go on to this one, just want to point out, a couple of people pointed out, this comes up a lot when there are possible discrepancies with numbers. And so people want to say, well, it could be a theological point that's being made to say that David is the seventh son. So
there could be any, I don't have to settle on any reason for it to not to be either a contradiction or a correction.
Right.
You know?
Right. This is just another explanation. Now, this is going to come up other times with other numbers in the Bible. Some might think, your mileage may vary. Some might think, well, that seems a little convenient. Well, not if it does turn out to be a number that is pregnant with meaning in the culture, but at the same time,
right. It's more important that it made sense to them than it makes sense to you.
Right. Right.
It was written for you, but it was written to them.
But I didn't bring that up as one of the possible. But again, if we're just looking for a way out of a contradiction, that's a possible explanation. And I'm saying that because, again, they're the one alleging the contradiction. They have the burden of proof. Yeah. But so it's good in that sense. But I don't know. Sometimes I do feel that that's a little convenient when people put it on the numbers. But 7 is a pretty important number to put it on.
Yeah.
So maybe. All right. So did we finish that? So, okay. So the killing, this killing that happens, there's a difference between, was this guy supposed to do this killing, and did this guy go too far, take glee in it, have the wrong attitude about it? And there is indication in the text that may be why.
Right. Intentions matter.
Yeah.
So even
and extent matters.
So even God himself, who does punish the wicked, also takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but we know that he does it, right? Well, if let's say,
if you take pleasure in the death of the wicked, even if he told you to kill somebody.
Yeah. So I don't understand the correction or I don't understand the contradiction here.
All you have to understand here is the difference between looking at merely someone's actions and looking at their heart as well.
Yeah.
That's the solution there.
But I still don't see that as a correction. Oh no, that wasn't supposed to happen. I mean, that would be like a Greg Boydish type answer, but I don't see that as a correction. There could be purposes in the act itself, and then there could be judgment in the intent of your part in the action.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
So, gotta be very careful.
All right, so that brings us to the end of our list there, but that's just to whet your appetite, because we have a host, as you've seen on Twitter. I posted it and got there's over 100 comments, some of them with multiple lists of Bible alleged contradictions. And so we're going to look at those with Steve Gregg in the coming days. I just have to schedule a date to do that, maybe in January toward the beginning. And we're going to go through a bunch of those. We'll also let you know when that's coming, so that, and hey, we're not going anywhere yet, so don't leave. But we'll also let you, submit your own. And we've had some Christians submit their own possible Bible difficulties. So we'll do that, and that's going to be good. Now, we've come to the end of the video, Jonathan, to where we can take questions. So anyone who has a question, go ahead.
I did also want to make a statement, and we've talked about this.
Make a closing statement.
We've made this point.
But if this is a debate between me and you, I claim I won already.
Okay,
go ahead.
Fine. We've made this point before that, we both are inerrantists.
Yes.
We both believe. I actually believe that the doctrine is still of importance. Now, I'm not an inerrantist in the way that, like, say, the Chicago Statement type people would be, because I think that that's out of date. Whatever. But
the Bible is without error. See, I say it one way, and then you always add a little to it. I say the Bible is without error in all that it intends to teach,
in the way it intended to teach it.
And I consider that under the umbrella of what I already said. But
it's
good to
clarity.
Explicitly say it. Yes.
It adds clarity, and that leaves that separates the doctrine.
That's why we're not flat earthers.
That separates the doctrine from trying to smuggle in hermeneutics that have to be a certain way, right? Which I think that the Chicago Statement talks about hermeneutics, and then they went and made another statement on hermeneutics off of that. And I think they're both good attempts, but I think that they ultimately don't work out. But for me, inerrancy is not a sacred cow, right? Because for me, I can write inerrant documents all day long, and they carry no weight with anybody. Like, I could write an inerrant phone book that has no mistakes, not even any typos, just everything thoroughly checked. Mm-hmm. But that's not a religious text that was inspired by God.
So when they say, how could man write an inerrant book? Well, it turns out man can write an inerrant book.
Plenty.
What's your point?
Inerrant, so my
but
point,
we're not even claiming that. We're claiming men moved by God wrote it.
Right. And I believe that the Bible is inerrant. But that's not the sacred cow to me, that even if I could be shown that something along these lines, mm-hmm. The number of chariots in Solomon's army, the number of kids in a genealogy, whatever. If you could show evidence that was an intentional or an unintended mistake and not theological
I'm
reasons,
open to a copyist error.
Yeah,
like
or not even a copyist error, that the chronicler
he just messed up.
That still does nothing to the Christian faith for me. And so I think
that's very difficult to demonstrate, though, as opposed to a copyist error, especially with numbers like that. Now,
well, I don't think the First Chronicle, David's kids was a copyist error, though.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I know, but I'm saying if you don't think it's either one, right. But I'm saying if someone wanted to say, no, he just got this wrong, it was not a copyist error, then you would have a really hard time demonstrating that it wasn't just a copyist error.
Right.
Yeah. But look here.
Like I said, all I'm doing is giving the benefit of the doubt to the author, because I do agree with his statement that he had access to the prior record of 1 Samuel. So, but is there a chance that he had other reasons? I think probably the death of one of them would be without children would be
that would
the most likely. But it doesn't strike me as like a contradiction or even a correction.
Right.
I also want to say, though, that I'm not opposed in general to the idea that, like, going back to the first video, that in the new covenant, if you want to say correction, okay, but that's like the wrong way to frame it, because it's like, it's not a correction that I can eat pork, right? Right. It's not it's just new information.
Newly permitted.
Yeah, it's new. That's now. Did Paul eat ham sandwiches? I have no idea, and I don't much care. But I don't see that as a correction that Gentiles can eat.
It's not a correction,
right?
So Slam says some theologians have suggested that Psalm 51:5 suggests that David was illegitimate bastard child. I'm actually inclined to think that there's water in that bucket, because I don't want to be unkind to David's mom, but the fact is, in sin, my mother conceived me. Now, here's what you do. I did this with a couple of people, and it came out consistent. Now, this is not the best way to figure out what the Bible says, all right, or means, but just try it, because what this exercise does is peel away the layer of systematic theology that says that David decided to stop here and do a treatise on original sin, and that's what this is all about. Yeah. And I think it's much more likely that what's going on here, in sin, my mother conceived me. Go ask some people that don't really know a lot about it, Christians or not Christians, but just don't know a lot about this text, haven't exegeted it or thought about the systematic theology of original sin, and say, what's this mean? In sin, my mother conceived me. You know what 100% of those people are going to say? Sounds like David's mother was in sin when she conceived him.
Yeah.
In sin, my mother conceived me.
Or he's in bad thing. In bad thing, my mother
conceived me.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a bad situation, in a bad scenario. She was being bad when she did it. However you want to say it. Or, since he's talking about his own sinfulness, it still works to point out, I'm sinful. I've been sinful like pretty much my whole life. And even my mother conceived me in sin. That all of that works. Then you go over to the story that we've been discussing, where Jesse is talking about, or is bringing out his sons. Doesn't even mention David. Oh, well, maybe it's because he's so puny. Well, yeah, that's what the cartoon movie showed when I was a little kid, but that doesn't seem right. David seems, whatever else you want to say about him or how he's described, he seems to be a pretty impressive kid. Lions, and he's killing all these. So, and it also describes him as ruddy when he comes in, which many scholars have taken to mean he had reddish hair. Well, why is that important to mention? Maybe because it wasn't the same as the rest of his kin. So I'm saying there is some evidence toward that in the story itself.
I mean, that I leave that in the possibilities. I mean, the simplest
What I don't want to
answer
be mean to is,
is just hyperbolic statement about the sinfulness of himself and the world and all of that in which he was conceived and all of that. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you take it. I don't know. Knowing what I know about ancient like adoption and all of that, though, I mean, it's like legally though speaking. I mean, David, I don't know. I can't speak to how Jesse felt about David, right? Mm-hmm. I can't psychologize Jesse, right? And I don't really care to.
Go ahead, I don't mind.
Whatever he felt about David versus the other kids, it really does. I mean, legally speaking, he's in the line, so. It's
two equally true statements here. Kevin says, of course, I think we know close enough what the original said. We can never know for sure. And then down here, another true. Hey, Butterfly says, I can't eat. Oh, that's not the one I wanted. Oh, here it is. Utopia Buster. No real human being can resist bacon. That's also true.
Well, I mean,
it's actually
I know
true.
A lot of people that don't
resist.
Eat pork, but not for theological reasons, right? So, I mean, I know Gentile Christians who do not eat pork, and it has nothing to do with theology.
So
it has to do with other things.
Nick says he wants to debate Steve Gregg. I need to get a date down for my debate with Steve Gregg. What are you going to debate? Egalitarianism? I'd be happy to try and host that debate, because Steve told me when we were in Australia that he pretty much will debate anybody. All right, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to, and for our audience, by the way, if you're not familiar with James White's debate with Steve Gregg, I just saw someone saying it was the best debate they've ever seen against James White. So, and it's like 4 episodes long. They did it on their radio shows.
Yeah, Leighton Flowers has got another debate with James White.
Yes, I plan to go. Are we going to go together? If there's a way.
Come on, patrons. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, it's hard to think about spending money during the holidays when I'm thinking about like the fact that I have a wife and kids and mom and
but it's not going to be during the holidays. It's later on. We'll talk about it again.
It's like I don't want to think about spending money.
Okay, he's not going to go, but I'm going to go.
I didn't say that I'm not going to go.
See, that's how I get the response I want.
I might. I mean, I am a board member of Soteriology 101, so I might tell Leighton to. We need to make an executive decision that some funds need to pay for our trip to.
Yes, it's going to be in Texas, I think. And Hey Butterfly says it's only the grease in bacon. I love a good pork chop. Well, you're going to hell. Not really. All right. So
well, you don't know that.
I don't know. What do I know? So, all right, but you're not going to go for that reason.
Not for that reason.
All right. Okay. So you can still put some questions in, and I'll try to see them and get them.
Right question.
Yeah, right. It'd be good if you wrote question real big, because I'm going to look away from
all caps.
Women in ministry is what he wants to do. Yeah. He wants to.
Well, Nick and I have already been trying to talk about this, but like I hate trying to coordinate people's schedules. It's that they have to do that and then tell me.
So, all right, look, guys. So I went to Australia.
I didn't, by the way.
And there is a kangaroo behind me in the set that you can see, and
that mysteriously deflates.
Occasionally, that kangaroo, in the days leading up to the trip to Australia, I would come in and the kangaroo would be completely deflated and laying on the floor, and nothing else seems to have happened, and no hole that I could find on the kangaroo for air to be expressed. So I don't know if that was the enemy trying to tell me, do not go. They're not real. You're gonna go over there and you're gonna lose the faith and start believing in kangaroos. Well, I went to Australia fully intending not to see a kangaroo. As you know, over the past year, I have shown plenty of videos showing how fake all the kangaroo evidence is. I have to say that just like a hardened, drug-addled, sexually active, just as far from God as a person can be, who gets saved and then becomes a hardcore believer to the extent that they become fundamentalists about the faith. I want to say this is happening with me and the kangaroo, because I had an experience, Jonathan, on the first night there, as I was walking through kind of a wooded area, where a kangaroo that was a good couple of inches taller than me at least, went racing in front of me and one of the students at about the distance you are from me right now, which is about 10 feet. I maybe said more on the Facebook, but more I think about it, it was close. And it was so fast, and it was shadowy, and it was dark, and it all happened so fast. But that's all it took. It was my road, not to Damascus, but to another part of Australia experience, in which I now believe in the kangaroo. Later, I saw a kangaroo in the zoo. I went to the Crocodile Hunter Zoo. You ever heard of the Crocodile Hunter?
Yeah,
Jonathan?
Of course.
His son Robert is the most eligible bachelor in Australia, and got to see him, got to see the kangaroo, touch the kangaroo. So I am kind of like Thomas needed to see the nail-scarred hands and the hole in Jesus' side. I needed to see something more to believe, but it has been granted. The kangaroo revealed himself to one such as me.
So up next, you'll be speaking in tongues, Stephen.
You've been speaking in Australian, maybe.
Maybe. Well, I was hoping that we would get footage of a kangaroo beating the snot out of you, but my wish.
That didn't happen. Real quick, back on theology. Derek says, Kay, I asked Pritchett his Kay was asking your systematic theology recommendation. The one we've been most recently pushing is Adam Harwood's biblical
Christian theology, biblical, historical, and systematic. I still think Odin's classic Christianity is great because it's a mix of systematic theology and historical theology, and that gives you the consensus of, what great theologians throughout the centuries of the church and various traditions, Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, whatever, where they all agree. But as far as just a good, handy, what is systematic theology? Here's the rough and ready. I think Harwood is way better than Grudem by lots. So I recommend Adam Harwood's Christian theology, biblical, historical, and systematic.
Amen.
I think that you should probably get classic Christianity. That should be in everyone's library. And I recommend William G.T. Shedd's dogmatic theology if you want a good, solid, reformed systematic theology.
Can we throw in, just for some light evening reading, just throw in some Geisler just because?
No, I don't.
No? They have it in one volume now.
I know. The other three we just mentioned are all better than...
Well, all right. But anyway, so the trip to Australia, I was with Steve Gregg the whole time. We talked about all kinds of things. We preached together. We answered questions together. There's a guy over there named Dan Patterson, who's a Christian apologetics guy, who used to work with RZIM. And he said he's heard that I was coming, and he's a fan of Trinity Radio, Jonathan. And he set up for us to go to a local pub and go in the back room of this pub, and it was filled with people. Like, I don't know, they said like 100 people in this small room. And we had Christians, non-Christians, I think at least one trans person there. We had all kinds of people there. We had Muslims there probably. We had Hindus there. It was really great. And we stood there and answered questions. Now, one of the questions that was asked was, should we share the gospel with everyone? Well, yes. Should we share the gospel with Russian orcs? Russian orcs. Now, it turns out I think they're making a slur toward Russian soldiers, but they said Russian orcs. And so the other guy that got up to give an answer, he said, listen, I don't know. My understanding is an orc is like a subhuman creature that is cannon fodder for Mordor in the Lord of the Rings series. I don't know what a Russian orc is, but here's the bottom line. If you run into a being and you're not sure if it's a person or not, go ahead and preach the gospel to it. Yeah, that was the answer that he gave. I thought it was fantastic. But we did. It was like an underground fight club of apologetics in this bar in Brisbane, Australia. And it was so incredible, so amazing. We just had a blast, man. And there were some Trinity Radio fans that turned up at that bar that live in Brisbane. And also there was another young lady who she was thinking about coming to the event that I was speaking at. And it was not really an open event, which I was kind of sad about, but it didn't work out. I want to apologize to them. Also, I want to thank Jim Amberg for this $20 Channel Angel super chat. We are so glad to see you back and would love for other people to give us a lot of money too.
Okay, Grudem is not bad. It's just not great. It's been a standard systematic theology for decades. It's just, There's just better ones. That might just be a preference thing.
Derek says, I liked Harwood's as well, but Sheds was quite an undertaking, not for novices.
Yeah, well, it's written in an older style, so it's a little bit more laborsome to read for some people. But I still recommend it. It's worth reading something above your level. You know, Mortimer Adler talks about this. If you're constantly reading at your level, you never grow. So you need to find something a little bit more difficult reading for wherever level you're at, and stretch those brain muscles. You know, it's good for you to read something that you have to wrestle with and that's challenging.
Amen. Now, this has been fun, but Jonathan, we've gone for about an hour, and I think it's time we end on time and wrap this up. But I just want to say to you all, I see some of you have been formulating some questions in this chat.
Yeah.
But we're gonna answer those with Steve Gregg, and we'll include yours in that list. What were you gonna say?
Yeah, and we're gonna start doing a chat cleanup video every week.
A chat cleanup video where Jonathan Pritchett just answers any questions that were asked that we did not get to.
It's not just questions.
Super chats.
No, it's if I see a comment, it's
that you want to talk about.
That I want to clean up your mess out there, commenters.
That could be pretty fun because we do get some pretty fun.
No, I was just going to say I agree, Derek. I agree, Derek. I agree, Derek. And I get to talk about music with Mr. Greenreads.
Yeah. Honestly Atheist says, oh, hi, this is an odd time. I'm sorry that we threw you off, Honestly Atheist. You are a valued viewer of this channel.
I like the Tuesday switch that we made before you left the country and where I sat here and worked.
It's too late in the day to put a vote up, but real quick, if you prefer Tuesday at the same time, go ahead and put a T. If you prefer Monday, go ahead and put an M. And if you want to include a preferred time, you could do that too.
Friday is just too...
But go ahead and do it quick.
Friday, our schedules have just become to the point where Friday is just too difficult for us.
Friday is pretty slammed because Thursday we have meetings, and then both on campus and off campus.
Fridays we have, before the weekend is up, we have to do all the things we were told to do.
Yeah. So earlier in the week is better.
Yeah.
I think. Well, nobody's voting.
Nobody cares.
Richard says M. M, T, M through F. This person doesn't care.
But the problem with Mondays is going to become when you have a long weekend, right?
Yeah.
Tuesday.
I'm seeing more M's than anything else. Of course, it is M, so obviously this is
I think
biased.
we just do it whenever we decide instead of we'll let the analytics decide.
Okay, I want to answer this last question because this is so. If Nick and Steve, now Nick is, for those that don't know, is a top shelf theologian, and he's working on a PhD right now. And so he in terms of education, he's about as far from Steve Gregg as you can imagine, but at the same time, like formal education. But of course, Steve Gregg has like a lifetime. He's in his 70s, so like a lifetime of experience that Nick doesn't obviously have that much, and it's been all answering Bible questions. So, what do I think would happen? He says, "What are the betting odds that Steve Gregg trounces me?" Well, I love your attitude about that. Here's what I think is probably going to happen if this manifests, and I'd love for it to.
Steve Gregg doesn't set out to trounce people in debates. It's not.
He doesn't. Well, that's the thing. He doesn't set out to, but he does it.
Right.
And he does it with robotic Commander Data like. Even Commander Data might not seem as serious, but but I think what'll happen is, Nick, you will roll out the best of the egalitarian position, and Steve Gregg will more than likely roll out, I think, probably the best a compatibilist can do.
Compatibilist.
Not a compatibilist.
Complementarian
can do, given that he's going to answer this all much more along the lines of, I think, what some would term a fundamentalist. And so I think he's going to give. I think as some of what he will say, people will look at and say, "Well, that sounds like what my dad would have said." But the problem is, this particular dad, you're going to have to deal with what he said, and it's going to be tough. So I think that some people will roll their eyes at what Steve does because it seems too much like what a fundamentalist would do. I think some people will roll their eyes at what you do because they'll think it's not enough, like what a fundamentalist would do.
Yeah, they're gonna. Steve he's grumpy old grandpa, and Nick is flaming lefty progressive Christian.
Yeah, and I told him, Steve,
and neither
Gregg,
one of those things is true, but it's just that's how people frame these things up.
Yeah, and I told Steve Gregg, I said there's like 13,000 people on our channel who've watched your debate with Chris Date, and a lot of them say Steve won, and he said, well, Braxton, that doesn't really give me any reason to think that I did, in fact, win, because people that say Steve won, they may just agree with my position already. They may not have watched the debate, or they may just like my ministry. And the same could be true for Chris. And this is, of course, true. But people like us,
YouTube comments, not necessarily a scientific poll, right?
Yeah. But I'm a scientific poll for what Braxton Hunter thinks.
Yes.
And so I'm the world's foremost
Utopia Buster gave the best
thinker
one.
on my own opinion.
Yeah, thank you.
What?
Utopia Buster answered our question with MT, which I appreciate that.
Yeah, Monday and Tuesday.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, this has been a blast. It's time to start up the outro music.
Yes. And
that means that we're about to leave. So anything you want us to absolutely see, you need to see it now. Steve is honest. Praise the Lord.
Yep. Don't listen to Christian music written after, like, the 80s.
Don't listen to Christian music after that?
Christmas music.
Oh, Christmas music after it.
Yeah.
Don't listen to Christmas music after the 80s.
Okay, whatever year that Mariah Carey song that everyone...
Yeah.
Nothing after that.
But that one counts.
I don't hate it.
Are you wanting to exclude it or include it?
I don't hate it like other people.
Why is it the fulcrum?
But it's just like that lets you know that it's Christmas in the modern world. It's just so present.
You know, there's
even
a lot
to be memed and make fun of. It's just that it's so.
You're not getting rid of it. It's going to be here in 1,000 years.
Yes.
Okay.
So, but I don't know.
She'll still be singing.
The classic Nat King Cole Christmas songs. I mean, chestnuts roasting on the oven. Those kind of songs make you feel like Christmas. Listening to Justin Bieber and Michael Bublé does not make you feel like it's Christmas.
Bono singing "Christmas Baby, Please Come Home" from the Rattle and Hum era. That's on the radio. That's going to be on the radio this year. And then there's "Father Christmas" by U2, where they took a secular Christmas song and changed it to be Christian with Bono's angelic vocals.
Bing Crosby, Gene Autry, Perry Cuomo. That's Christmas.
Does Michael Jackson have a Christmas song?
I'm sure.
Some real missed territory if he doesn't.
Yeah. Oh, A Marshmallow World from Dean Martin. That's Christmas. Big band. It's not Michael Bublé.
Sing it.
No, we need to go.
Sing it. No, he's like, are you really going to make me sing it?
I have a voice that can clear an arena.
I got...
There's a reason
I got Vocab Malone to do an original rap for us.
I can't sing. You can sing. I make people laugh in church at me when I try to.
I'm dreaming. Sing it with me.
Like
of a white
people laugh at me at church.
Christmas.
Like I'll even laugh when Noah tries to sing. We're awful. No one in my family can sing, except for Zach.
Well, praise the Lord.
Yeah, he sings in the choir.